It's regional weekend here in Connecticut. We've got the UConn women heading down to Bridgeport to get ready to see if they can make another Final Four. So there's no one else that I'd rather have on the podcast than Russ Steinberg. You know him from UConn Twitter. You know him from Boardroom. Russ, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. Excited for this weekend.
I know. I think it's going to be a really interesting weekend down in Bridgeport. I like the four teams we've got there. I think it's going to make for an interesting weekend. I want to start obviously with the home team here in UConn, in which most of the people tuning into this podcast care about. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this team through the first two games of the tournament here. We saw them, beat Mercer with relative ease, but definitely a bit more of a struggle against UCF the other night.
It was. And the thing that I kind of told myself after that game is if you remember, we were talking after the men's team beat VCU earlier this year in the Bahamas, and we said, you know what, it was ugly, but they're not going to play another team like that all year.
That's
thinking the same thing after this one. And UCF didn't defend quite like VCU does. VCU, presses you 94 feet. They make your life living hell. UCF is just all over you in the backcourt, and they make you draw out these possessions, and they make you take bad shots. Other teams aren't going to play UConn like that. And that gave me a little bit of comfort. Now, I went to bed on Monday night thinking there is 0% chance UConn is beating Indiana. The season is over. All hope is lost. I've since, eased back on that a little bit, and I would like to see a more normal game this weekend.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be an interesting matchup between these two teams. We can get into that in a bit. I'm curious to pick your brain a little bit. We've seen Paige back for a handful of games. Curious to see where your thoughts on how she's been playing of late. I know it's always tough coming back from an injury, especially an injury like the one she had, and now you're being thrown into do or die NCAA tournament games, which has to be tough.
Yeah. Her, scoring wise, she's kind of been up and down, which you would expect. I don't think we're going to see that level of consistency until next year. She's playing probably about as well as you could reasonably expect someone who missed 19 games to play. It seemed against UCF, and maybe part of it is a product of the opponent, but it seemed against UCF she was maybe a step and a half slower than she normally was. It not in terms of quickness necessarily, but in decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And she just didn't quite have that level of confidence that we've come to expect. The hope is obviously as she gets more games under her belt, she gets better. But of course, Saturday could very well be the last game. She's not going to have to be her normal self, but she's going to have to be a lot closer to it in order for UConn to go as far as they want to.
Taking Paige out of the equation here, if UConn's to beat Indiana and continue this run, who are you looking for to be that player that's going to be the difference maker? And you can give me a name or two if a couple come to mind.
Yeah, it depends on the opponent, of course. I think in this game against Indiana, you might see Olivia Nelson-Ododa and Dorka Juhas play a bigger role. It's been a struggle for Indiana this year, defending in the front court. You might see them score a little bit more. I think in terms of consistency throughout the rest of this tournament, I would like to see Kristen Williams really get going.
Yeah.
She had some great moments against UCF, hit a big three down the stretch. If that could kind of fuel her and give UConn just another scoring option, I think that's going to go a long way. I don't think you're going to be able to count on Paige to fill the stat sheet. She'll get her points for sure, but between Williams, Fudd, and Ducharme, a couple of them are going to have to be on each game. And Williams is a senior, and she had that great tournament run last year. So yeah, I would be looking to her most of all. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting you mentioned Liv there because I didn't tell you this before we recorded, but this episode's going to be a joint one. We've got the associate head coach of Indiana who's going to be hopping on, Rhett Worsbia. And when I asked him the question of who he's really been scouting and who he's been looking at, she was the first player he named in terms of what she can do, in terms of passing out of the post and her abilities there. So it's something that's interesting that's kind of top of mind on the Indiana coaching staff right now.
Yeah, but because Nelson-Ododa has never been a big scorer, I think a lot of what she does gets underrated a little bit. Mm-hmm. Especially this year, she has improved defensively from junior year to senior year. more than she has in any year in her career. Her footwork has been excellent. She's blocking shots. She's become a real deterrent in the post. The coach is absolutely right. She can pass out of the post very well. She can get herself in position, and she can score when she needs to.
Mhm.
I do think she is going to play a big role in this game.
You've been following bracketology throughout the season. Did you think you'd see UConn get to this point where they could be the 2 seed in Bridgeport? Did it seem inevitable to you, or was there some serious concern from your perspective that they might not have even made it to this point?
By that you mean made it to the Sweet 16?
Or no, made it to the seeding that they've gotten
Oh, okay.
in terms of the region and all.
I was actually a little surprised that they got there. In the last seed reveal, UConn was a 3 seed. And at that point, I think there was like a week left in the regular season, and conference tournaments were right after. UConn didn't have any big games left, big out of conference games.
Sorry about that. Go
Okay.
ahead.
UConn didn't have any big out of conference games left at that point. They just had to win the games they had and not screw up, and then hope that people ahead of them did. And I was a little surprised that the dominoes fell to the point where UConn was, I think, the second 2 seed.
Yeah.
I thought if they did get up to the 2 line, it might be in a situation where they wouldn't be able to get to Bridgeport. Because the 2 seeds in front of them would have gotten priority.
Right.
So I think when it got to the end of the Big East tournament, it started to look like that would be the case.
In terms of this matchup coming up against Indiana on Saturday, what are you looking for in particular? And maybe for those, I know you follow the game so well, for those who might not be as in tune with some of the other teams in women's college basketball, what does Indiana do well that might give UConn some trouble?
I think the thing that worries me is that they have so many different options to score. Grace Berger is probably the biggest name on the team. She leads them in scoring and in assists. But if she, let's say she goes off in the first quarter, scores 10 points, Gino could say, all right, Nika Mule, defensive player of the year, you're going to go stop her. Well, then they have Mackenzie Holmes. They have Allie Patberg. They have Nicole Cardano-Hillary. They have all of these other players that could also beat you. This is a team with 5 double-digit scorers. So that concerns me a little bit because UConn can defend, but when you start talking about individual matchups, I get a little bit worried, especially because you're going to need somebody like AZ Fudd in the game for long stretches because she's such a good shooter,
right?
And she could score, and you're going to need offense, but she's going to have to defend somebody too, and that's a weakness in her game right now.
No, I think that's an interesting point and going to make for an interesting matchup. In terms of what UConn does, what do you think they can do to keep Indiana off guard and maybe, give themselves the best chance they can here to win?
I think kind of the flip side to having 5 double-digit scorers is that also usually means you don't go too deep into your bench. And they do play about eight players consistently, but once they get out of that top 6, the production level falls off a little bit. So if you can tire them out, maybe that's what UConn tries to do. Now, UConn's not a team that's going to run you off the court by any stretch,
right?
But they are a team that likes to play at their own pace. And, you saw UCF really slow them down, force them to make a lot of passes and really, look at that second or third option. If UConn can get their first option consistently and then really keep the pressure going, because UConn does have depth now, I think that's going to give them their best chance.
All right, gotta ask you for the prediction here on this one here.
It's really tough. I am very close to 50-50. I'm going to give it to UConn. I'll say, the home crowd will be a factor. It was certainly a factor the other day. I think UConn just has a couple more ways to beat you than Indiana does. Now, of course, they're going to have to be on. Hardly anyone was on the other day.
Yeah.
So, there's a difference between saying and doing. But I'll give UConn the slightest edge.
All right. I think people listening to this episode will be happy to hear that.